Everything that we were asked to talk about tonight is very much around innovation and innovation adoption. So we'll be discussing questions around how do you pick between the myriad of wonderful innovation possibilities that are out there for your company, and more importantly, how do you drive them through the organization, both existing businesses and new ones, and get them to stick. So with that, I think I will jump right in, and I think we're going to direct the first couple of questions and then kind of have a jump ball for some of the other ones. So maybe to lead us off on our first question, I think I'm going to let Steve go first, so you can be thinking as I'm asking the question. But everybody will follow up. So when we talk about innovation and new technologies, the question really is around how do you develop new emerging technologies for your business and or your customers?
Well, thanks, Joe. Have you really thought about innovation from the perspective of how do you actually create innovation inside of a company? And this is a question I've pondered for quite a number of years, because I've worked for companies like Nokia. I also worked for Huawei for 3 years. And Silicon Valley is a place where a lot of companies come just hoping to find innovation. We'll just send a bunch of smart people to Silicon Valley and somehow something magical will pop out of it. And what I observed is, actually, given the fact that these companies were very successful in developing products, they actually had no thorough plan or thinking around how do you produce innovation. And also think about the people that are in your organizations. Is innovation a trait like hair color, that some person is just naturally innovative, and if you kind of put them off somewhere that lots of great ideas will come out? And what I concluded is, no, actually none of that is really true. Like anything we do with respect to engineering or in business, it requires a very thorough plan. So what I set out when I took to work for CSR, which was in kind of a desperate situation, when the CEO hired me about 3 years ago, he said, this company doesn't have any innovation and we need to restart innovation. So what we did was we actually created a very thorough process and practice around innovation, where we first looked at the marketplace, looked at the megatrends that were in the marketplace, and tried to understand how they impacted our business. An example would be, we looked at basically, we do a lot of Bluetooth technologies. So we started looking at how connected devices will change our world, and now that term is really the Internet of Things. So we started looking at our different markets and trying to understand over a 5-year period how that would change. Then we started thinking about our customers and how things would change for our customers. I mean, think back when you had your first mobile phone and how much more productive you were with mobile voice. Well, already you should have been anticipating that in the marketplace you would have mobile internet. And think about where we are today. What's the next set of innovation which is related to that? So thinking about your customers around the business and how are their concerns going to change as a function of time. And then finally to start thinking about your products. But thinking about your products over a long horizon of time, because you need to be anticipating at least 2 to 3 years into the future. If you're not, and your competitor has already started innovating and creating a product, by the time you discover it, you're probably going to be too late. And so once you look at those products and you've looked at them over a long enough period of time, then what that allows you to do is to be able to look at what are the technologies. So we do our product planning now, and we actually do our technology roadmap planning at the same time. So it's a very thorough practice that we are in right now, each and every year that we do it. And we have about 10% of our engineering resources that are invested in creating those two technologies, which go into the products, not that we're immediately developing, but in the next generation of products.
Well, that's just terrific. I think I'd love to hear Mehmood's take on this as being in a little different kind of business. So can you talk about developing new emerging technologies a bit?
Well, unlike many of the businesses that I think have already touched on, and most of the people in this room, PepsiCo obviously is in the food and beverage industry, is a highly, first of all, vertically integrated industry and a highly vertically integrated business. I'm going to give you an example. We do the genetic breeding and DNA targeted breeding of our own crops, and all the way through to our product being delivered in the supermarket, and everything in between is a Pepsi person doing that job. So if we were in the IT industry, we'd be starting with sand and making computers. When we think about innovation, we're talking about innovation everywhere along that supply chain. The other is we don't have a straightforward relationship with the customer. We have consumers, we have shoppers, which is typically not the consumer, it's typically a shopper mom, and then we have customers, our retailers, which are also becoming online. So for us, what we have to think about is where in that system is a new technology actually going to move the needle. It isn't as simple as if I create this new widget, I will create a new market. Perhaps the one daunting statistic that I go to bed every night thinking about is 1.3 billion humans consume a Pepsi product every day. That's about a fifth of the planet, which means we have to make product, move product, and sell product to a fifth of the planet's population every single day. And that system doesn't lend itself to suddenly saying, oh, I'm going to find a new way of doing this. It's not online where I can virtually reach them. When you have more delivery vehicles than UPS owns, you've got to really think through. So I can go on, but it's going to be a very different conversation.
Terrific. Well, why don't we quickly move to our next question on this? So maybe Darlene, you can lead us off if you don't mind, on how do you do effective R&D, both the research and then the bridge over to actual development.
Yeah. So in terms of that bridge, I assume the research is more the longer range and emerging kinds of technologies, which for the most part in Agilent is really the primary charter of our research labs, and I've had the privilege of leading the labs for the last 10 years or so. And, really creating a culture where the technologists understand that, it's obviously important to get patents, it's great to go to meetings and publish work, but the real value is in seeing a technology that you've really invested in make it to customer and really create business success for the company. And creating that culture where we actually measure the value we've enabled, I think has gone a really long way, because first off, you got to pick the technologies that really are not only challenging and exciting for the research community, but also the ones that are going to be important to customers and business if you can do it. So, the demoralizing thing is to do great research, great technology, and have it go nowhere. And so creating a strong tie with the business partners so that when we get that research to the point of transfer, that they're really excited to take it forward, and that the technologists are willing to adapt and really do those last things that are really important towards making research into something that's in development. You can't just do it once and say it's really cool. So I think that's a big piece of it. And the other part of the research is research takes time, and if you're doing things that, regardless of the industry, whether it's genomics, IT, moving relatively quickly, if you're out there 3 to 5 years, a lot of things are going to change over that course of the research. And so I think the other piece is to, on a regular basis, take a look at that technology and that R&D investment, and maybe every 6-9 months ask yourself, what's changed? Is this still as attractive today as it was 6 or 9 months ago? Why or why not? What have we learned about the technology under our control, but at the same time, what's changed in the markets, what's changed with competitors, what's changed within Agilent in terms of business priorities, and be willing to continue to kind of morph that funnel and not just keep on going without asking those questions.
You said so many fascinating things. Before I let you off the hook, there's one follow-up question I wanted to ask, because I know a lot of people work with this idea of trying to measure your technologists on measuring value enabled. I love the way you said that. So how do you deal with measuring value enabled versus value realized, if you will?
So I'm going to kind of take a hybrid to that one. So several years ago, we invented an internal metric that has no external value at all. But we would ask our business partners to look at the revenue that they had in 2013, look across those product lines, and for each area to evaluate how much of that revenue was really enabled by longer range R&D. Okay, completely, it's a completely subjective measure. And some businesses, if it's an area, that, where the labs has done something, the businesses have done something, we've all done some great things, maybe you'll get a 30% credit factor, and that might be great. There's other areas where we might think we've done a lot and they don't think we did anything, so that's a 0. And then there's other areas where they look at that and they say, if it weren't for this particular component or this particular push that we made several years ago, we'd have no business here at all, and that's 100% credited, okay? So in the eyes of our business partners, what chunk of revenue would they, in principle, credit to the labs without taking any credit away from the businesses, because there wouldn't be anything if the businesses didn't commercialize the technology. But we actually started this back in 2005, and we measure it every year, and we track it, and I think it also demonstrates to our business partners how much we care about making a difference, and it also helps feed that culture of it's not just great technology, it's great technology and great products.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious, that same question, Peruse, around how do you do effective R&D and kind of that intersection between R&D being always a key pivot point for any new technology. Anything you can tell us about the great learnings from Maxim or other places in your career?
I'll try to talk about both the R and the D because I think they're very different animals. I think on the D side, which is probably the more straightforward and more familiar topic, the development activities tend to be very much execution-oriented. There's not a lot of pathfinding required. There's not a lot of new science involved. So time to market is critical. You need to make sure that you have the proper resourcing, you've got the right amount of automation to enhance the efficiency of the engineers, et cetera. All the motherhood and apple pie kind of statements that we can make. And many companies have very strong metrics around measuring that development process. Actually, a very well-run company will have, a lot of good, solid metrics around that, and it almost runs like a machine. Now, you take that mentality, which is really what a good company needs to do, and then you suddenly want to shift it to, okay, now I want to do research. There's a great dissonance in that whole concept because, the people that are running the D part of the company know what they need to do, they know how they're measured, et cetera, but the R part is the part that's really, really very tough to quantify, and it's very intangible. So now let's say that I've convinced people to go after the R part, right? The first question I need to ask myself is, well, among all this myriad of emerging technologies, some of which could be disruptive to our business, some of which could provide a green field opportunity to expand our business, how do I pick, right? So let's assume that I've found a magic way to pick that particular set of technologies that I want to invest in. So if I've picked that, in my experience, there are at least 3 elements that are required for success once you've picked a technology and you want to go execute on it. The first is the people and the company culture. There has to be a tolerance for failure in quotes, because research by definition is risky. You will get 10% success, 20% success, and you cannot afford to have your most talented people work on something where the company then looks upon it and frowns upon it. So the culture of the company and setting the expectations around failure or lack thereof is very important. The people that you need to have in these kinds of organizations need to have the right set of disciplines. Usually multidisciplinary tends to provide much better results in my experience, where people are approaching the problem from very novel angles. So usually I found university students are actually a very good mix compared to having just fully experienced engineers who've been burned 5,000 times and they don't want to touch something new, right? So the mixture and the composition of the group is very important, both from an experience perspective, from a discipline perspective, and also from an attitude perspective. They need to be risk takers. They need to thrive in that kind of environment. So people and culture is very important. The next thing is, organization. You don't want to create this kind of R&D, this kind of research, I don't think, within the confines of a business unit, which is highly metric driven, which is highly regimented, you really want to be able to segregate those engineers for some period of time where they can work in freedom, away from the distractions of running the normal business, right? Have that space and time allowed to them, and then they can move back into the business unit. And some relationship between that project and the business is really important. Otherwise, those people that are in the research department are going to be looked upon as being in ivory towers and completely insulated and so on. There's going to be a stigma associated with them. And then the third element is really what is being taught in D School at Stanford and other places is really fail fast and often.